Yeah. So I got a lot of kind of kudos, great response, kind of from my dissertational work, and I feel like, in a way, it's very surface level, and it's very I won't call it patronizing, but very it's flattering in a lot of ways, but it's a traditional kind of response. The wheelchair guy makes it. He did his PhD, got a kid. It's a beautiful story, period. But that ain't where this ends, because my dissertation is really about something. And I think in a lot of ways that's kind of lost on people, in the sense of, hey man, you did that, kind of a thing. And I bow to everybody and say thank you, thank you, thank you. I did that, you know what I'm saying, kind of a thing. So I think it's very important though that I get to the meat and the potatoes about what my dissertation is about, right? And to sum it up, right? Like this is key. This is what I want everybody to kind of take away, not just from my work, but from what I'm saying, and why I'm doing this, right? Because for me to be able to accomplish these things, it has to be something that drives me, or any human being that accomplishes something. It's a goal there. It's a drive. You don't just do it to do it. You know what I'm saying? That don't even make sense in a very real way. So my dissertation is about understanding disability. Now, that sounds very cliche and very high level, and in that sense, I guess you could say it is, but it's a specific distinction, that's made in the dissertation, but that my scholarship in general makes. Uh, Two specific distinctions about disability that are, I would say, key and vital to our understandings of it, right? And so the one thing is the problem, right? The problem is the term disability is, as Artiles would say, used as a trope. We just say disability if you have a learning disability, for instance, that's the term, right? You're a person with a disability, a student with a disability in a K-12 setting. If you have a behavioral disorder of some sort that's not a behavioral disorder necessarily in society, you may operate a little differently, but it's not a disorder. It's a disorder in the classroom, so it's context specific. And we use disability in the EDD world, or the employment world, as if you can't do your normal job, then it doesn't really matter to what extent you may have an impairment or whatnot. You're considered to have a disability. So the term disability is very tropic, is the way I would say it. But that's problematic in a lot of ways. It's specifically problematic to individuals with disabilities, one. But it's also problematic to people's understanding of individuals with a disability and or the term disability, because when it's used, it's a blurification, and that blurification is then projected, especially onto Black and brown communities, onto elderly people, onto a lot of persons that are historically devalued. And so it becomes a tool or a mechanism, not necessarily the term disability, but it's being a trope. Then it's an oppressive, it's a way that oppression is exercised, right, on a societal level. So that's the problem. And in my work, I'm pointing out that there's a difference between the individuals with a disability who identify that way, persons with a disability XYZ, and this notion of disability as a existential kind of thing, right? And that specifically, two distinctions have to be made, and one claim. The two distinctions are that the experience of disability, as we call it now, is different than identifying as an individual with a disability. And so I would argue that the experience of the individual, right, whether or not they identify as a person with a disability, is something that I would use a separate term for. So it's about terminology. We should call that alias modi facio, or otherwise something else other than disability in the sense of persons with disability. That distinction of persons with a disability should be honored, cherished, and otherwise kept, right, as a thing, as an identity group of people that's who they see themselves as. And then the other part of it is disability that comes inherently from the environment. So the current understanding or definition of disability is understood as an experience or that one feels due to their physical or physiological, that be physical or mental or any other biological state in which they are, right? Especially with regards to impairment, medical types of impairment, mixed with the environmental setting, right? And how the environment is otherwise capable of accepting them as they are or not, right? And so that whole notion of experiencing disability, like I said, is what you should term alias modi facio, the experience of it, and how that's translated, either perceived as the individual with a disability or perceived as an individual without, who is speaking about others, right? And then the other distinction I was getting to is where disability that originates from the environment, right, or disability, that aspect of disability which is not inherently tied to a person, right? So your impairment is inherently tied to the individual or to you or your lack thereof. But when you have an impairment and there are aspects of the environment that makes their impairment particularly more disabling, if you will, as current terminology would have it, that deserves another word, that aspect of the environment where the disability emanates from. And that would be facultas morhinum, FM. And so those two things I think are vital, right? So when we talk about disability that originates because you can't do your job, then that would be a certain aspect of either one of those, amount of impairment, if you will, or alias modi facio, or your experience of having a disability in that way, and then coupled with the environment, your job being something that's specific to that, making it a thing you can't do, if you will, would be the facultas morhinum. But the individual may or may not identify as a person with a disability, and that, to me, is the core central point of the work. When that is the case, right, in certain environmental contexts where it's overly present, right, where this environment or environmental context is particularly marginalizing or particularly disabling to people who have impairments or otherwise have a disability in that way. And we're talking about disproportionately to similar environments. There are certain aspects of life where these things are necessarily expected, and certain ones which they are or are not to a more or less degree. Then in those instances, especially where the environment is particularly incapable, if you will, or marginalizing or otherwise disabling for persons with a disability and others who may be associated with disability or experience an amount of alias modi facio, or where facultas morhinum, if you will, is disproportionately present, then that would lend to the claim that certain societal structures, right, where that is the case, are disabled themselves, and where disability, in the notion that we think of it now, or in that term, right? I would say facultas marginum is extreme, more present, that these settings can have the same condition as we know of disability, but be disabled, if you will. More or less capable or able to do the things in which they're supposed to do, whether that be to educate, to imprison, to police, to adjudicate, or otherwise be a judiciary type of body. And it runs the gamut, whether it's about housing or any other type of societal structure, organization, body, is. And that may be my most radical claim, but at the end of the day, that's a claim that I stand by, and one that I'll continue to attempt to show and prove through data and logical reasoning to exist. And so that's where my work is, that's what it centers on, that's what it's about. And ultimately it's about improving these understandings around what's contemporarily known as disability in a way that allows for a person with a disability identity to be honored, and for B, for settings in which, or environmental structures in which, facultas marginum or disability is overly present within the societal structure, the system, to be focused on, and otherwise understood as types of barriers. And these barriers can affect people beyond disability, and so that's the point of not just locusing it there, but understanding it from there, and otherwise attempting to understand and grasp understandings of societal barriers, systemic barriers, institutional barriers, however you want to put that, but understanding that as being a quality of systems and not able and better understood by looking at systems in that way rather than looking at individuals' experience with these systems and trying to cross-reference those across the gamut of experience and or identity. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's why I feel that my work is vital. I feel like it's important and should not be lost on just I guess my goals and what I've done as a human being, and otherwise some of those things that are very flattering to me, but take the focus, I guess, off of the reasoning behind who I am, what I'm doing, and why. Peace. If you have any questions about my work or otherwise want to be more interested or more familiar with it, reach out to me. Sajala who I say all this stuff, and I wish everybody happy holidays. Peace.